Shalom. Today my subject is the roots of idolatry. If you'll turn with me to the book of Romans, chapter 1, reading from verses 18 to 23. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has showed it to them. For the invisible things of Him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that, when they knew God, they glorified Him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations. Their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds, four-footed beasts, and creeping things. In this message, I would like to show you that the basic root of idolatry is rejection of God as God. The rejection of God as creator of all things, seen and unseen. And that instead of people worshiping the one true God, whose name is Yahweh, the only true God, mankind has since the time of Adam and Eve turned towards the worship of the creature rather than the creator. We're going to see the details of how this unfolded from the time of the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve, we know, rejected the word of Yahweh regarding not eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. By that rejection, they, number one, were rejecting Him as God. Number two, they were rejecting Him as Creator. Now, in modern times, you would have heard of the man called Charles Darwin, a supposed scientist who tried to gather evidence from biology and other sources to prove that humans came through evolution and not the result of the direct creation by God. The Bible tells us that covetousness is idolatry. We see this in the book of Colossians, chapter 3 and verse 5. Mortify therefore your members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil concupiscence, and covetousness, which is idolatry. For which things' sake the wrath of God comes on the children of disobedience. How was Eve an idolater? Well, we know under the temptation of the serpent, Eve coveted wisdom, the knowledge of good and evil, by eating the forbidden fruit, and that knowledge supposedly would make her to be like God. So you can see the covetousness in her heart was to be able to see things, discern between good and evil, just like God Himself, to be like Him. This was covetousness on her part. And that's idolatry. We see this in Genesis chapter 3, verse 6. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. You can see there, a tree to be desired to make one wise. So therein lies a very important lesson for us. Any covetous on our part is not just for money or property, but it can be for wisdom and knowledge, particularly the kind of supernatural knowledge that lies beyond our sphere. All that is idolatrous. There's another aspect to idolatry, or how idolatry comes about in people. And here I refer to 1 Samuel chapter 15 and verse 23. And this is the King James Version. For rebellion is as a sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because thou hast rejected the word of Yahweh, he hath also rejected thee from being king. The ESV version of the same verse reads, For rebellion is as a sin of divination, and presumption is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of Yahweh, he has also rejected you from being king. The Hebrew word that is translated as stubbornness in the King James can also be translated as presumption or presumptuousness, and that is equated to iniquity and idolatry. Why? You think in terms of the sin of stubbornness. What is it all about? It is really insisting on one's own way, insisting that one's way is superior to other ways, particularly the way of Yahweh or the ways of Yahweh, choosing our own way rather than His way, choosing our word rather than His word. That is idolatry. So we see that idolatry really had its first origin in the Garden of Eden, where Eve rejected Yahweh's word and coveted the knowledge of good and evil. But what about Adam? Haha. We see that after Eve took of the ate of the forbidden fruit, Eve chose to follow his wife rather than Yahweh. What does that tell us? That tells us that, in effect, Adam was worshipping Eve, worshipping the creature rather than the creator. He must have idolized her. What she said was more important to him than what Yahweh has said. Her word was more important to him than what Yahweh's word was to him. Now, that's a very, very important point that I am trying to make. we can idolize people. Now remember, people are the creation of Yahweh. So when we idolize another person, we are worshiping the creature as opposed to the creator. So Adam had a choice: choose Yahweh and his way, or choose his wife. And sadly, he chose his wife and followed her, eating of the fruit. The Bible tells us that Eve was deceived. They don't tell us that Adam was deceived. Yeah? Adam had no excuse. He was head of the family. He was the husband of Eve. He had received the word from Yahweh. He should have known better. So men, be careful. Of course, women can also idolize their husbands and other men. What about idolatry after Adam and Eve, especially before the flood? Here I refer you to the book of Jasher, chapter 2, verses 4 to 5, and I quote. Now, the book of Jasher is not in the canon of the Bible, but it's quoted in the Bible, the book of Jasher. Quote, "And the sons of men went, and they served other gods. They forgot Yahweh, who had created them in the earth. And in those days, the sons of men make images of brass and iron, wood and stone, and they bowed down and served them. And every man made his god, and they bowed down to them. And sons of men forsook Yahweh all the days of Enosh, or Enos, E-N-O-S, and his children." Unquote. Now, please, Enos or Enosh is not the same as Enoch. This is the son of Seth. Okay? Therefore, the grandson of Adam. So, what we see from the book of Jasher was that in the third generation already, idolatry in terms of bowing down to metal, wood, and stone carvings or images already came into being. Just 3 generations after Adam. And you can check Genesis 4:26 about Enos, and I quote, "And to Seth, to him also there was born a son. He called his name Enos. Then men began to call upon the name of Yahweh." Now let me turn next to the book of Enoch. Okay, I have a version by R.H. Charles, published in 1917. "Woe to them who reject the measure and eternal heritage of their fathers, and whose souls follow after idols, for they shall have no rest." Likewise, the second book of Enoch, and I quote verse 10, or chapter 10, "And I said, Woe, woe, how very frightful this place is. And those men said to me, This place, Enoch, has been prepared for those who do not glorify God, who practice on the earth the sin which is against nature, which is child corruption in the anus, in a manner of Sodom, of witchcraft, on enchantments, divinations, trafficking with demons, who boast about their evil deeds, stealing, lying, insulting, coveting, resentment, fornication, murder, and who steal the souls of men secretly, seizing the poor by the throat, taking away their possessions, enriching themselves from the possession of others, defrauding them, who, when they are able to provide sustenance, bring about the death of the hungry by starvation, and when they're able to provide clothing, take away the last garment of the naked, who do not acknowledge their Creator, but bow down to idols which have no souls, which can neither see nor hear, vain gods, constructing images, and bowing down to vile things made by hands. For all this place has been prepared as an eternal reward. Unquote. Enoch was referring to hell. All right, let's continue our discussion of idolatry before the flood. And here I want to refer to the incident in which the sons of men came down from heaven and copulated with women to produce Nephilim, so-called giants on the face of the earth. I refer you to the book of Genesis, chapter 6, reading from verses 12 to 16. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. Take it therefore good heed unto yourselves, for ye saw, that's Genesis 6:12, corrupt. And Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 15 and 16. So 15 and 16 refer to Deuteronomy chapter 4, not Genesis 6. Take ye therefore good heed unto yourselves, for you saw no manner of similitude on the day that Yahweh spake unto you in Horeb out of the midst of the fire, lest you corrupt yourselves and make yourself a graven image, the similitude of any figure, the likeness of any male or female. What I want to note, especially about these two passages, Genesis 6 and Deuteronomy 4, is that the same Hebrew word, Shabbat or Shobat, H7843, is used in both passages. And the English word translated from Shobat is the word corrupt. And the word corrupt in Deuteronomy passage that I just read out links the word corrupt or Shobat to idolatry, and therefore informs us of the idolatry of Genesis 6:12. So now the same Hebrew word Shobat was used in Genesis 6:12, and Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 16 shows us that the same Hebrew word Shobat refers to idolatry. Now, as recorded in Enoch's books, the sons of God were angelic beings who had come down from heaven and copulated or married human women, producing unusual offspring called Nephilim, the giants, mighty men, Gibors or Giborim in the Hebrew, and Shem, famous people. But as recorded in Enoch's books, these sons of God or angelic beings, when they came down to earth, also extended the scope of idolatry to include worship of the heavenly hosts, that means angelic beings, as well as the sun and the moon and the stars. You can see the widening scope of idolatry, aided and abetted by angelic beings that had come down to earth. And we look at the post-flood phenomenon of idolatry. Let's turn again to Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 15 all the way to 20. Let me read again 15, 16 because they give us a context. Take it therefore, take ye therefore good heed unto yourselves, for ye saw no manner of similitude on the day that Yahweh spake unto you in Horeb out of the midst of the fire, lest you corrupt yourself, make you a graven image, the similitude of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any beast that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged fowl that flies in the air, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in waters beneath the earth, lest you lift up your eyes unto heaven when you see the sun and the moon and the stars, even all the hosts of heaven, should be driven to worship them and serve them, which the Lord thy God has divided unto all nations under the whole heaven. But Yahweh has taken you and brought you forth out of the iron furnace, even out of Egypt, to be unto him a people of inheritance, as you are this day. So what is Yahweh telling the nation of Israel? Let me begin with the last verse. Namely, he was reminding them that they were a special nation, called out via Abraham from all the other nations of the world, a special, unique nation called Israel. Number 2 point in this very important passage, that Yahweh himself, when he came down on Mount Sinai to give the Torah to Moses, no one could see a form, an image of him, a shape of him at all. No similitude. What is the reason? Because Yahweh doesn't want us to have the correct idea of his true image. Can you imagine people will rush to the craftsman and have statues made of the image that they saw on Mount Sinai? So the warning is that we are not, that the Israelites were not to be like the heathen nations. And in another video to come sometime in the future, I'll show you there that at the Tower of Babel, Yahweh had not only dispersed the nations and then removed the one language and gave them a diversity of languages. And not only that, but he gave up on all the nations of the world and assigned 70 sons of God, angelic beings, to be in charge of the 70 nations. In Genesis chapter 10, 11, you can see the table of nations there, and the count is about 70, in some versions 72, but no matter. Just keep to that figure. But Yahweh also stated that he would reserve one nation for himself. He was not there at the Tower of Babel. He was only there after Abraham was called out, and after Abraham produced Isaac, and after Isaac produced Jacob, who then produced his 12 sons and their children, which tend to constitute the nation of Israel. So the warning to the Israelites was that they were not to behave like all the other nations that Yahweh had disinherited and put under the charge of those angels, the sons of God. Now, in the next video that I'm going to show you sometime in the future, the roots of Babylon, I will show you there that these angelic beings that were in charge of the nations corrupted the nations and promoted worship of angels and worsened the idolatry, idolatrous practices. And you get the worship of demigods, a men who claim to be gods, maybe men who were half um, angelic beings, Nephilim, because there are Nephilim before the flood and Nephilim after the flood, mighty men. Okay, and we also know that when Yahweh called Abraham out from his father's household, he actually came out of idolatry. In Joshua chapter 24, verse 2, this is what we read. And Joshua said unto all the people, thus says Yahweh Elohim of Israel, your fathers dwelt on the other side of the flood in old time, even Terah, the father of Abraham, the father of Nahor, and they served other gods. We also have information from other sources that Terah, the father of Abraham, not only worshipped idols and other gods, but he was a maker of idols as well. That to me is quite a revelation of Abraham's background. And it's really to Abraham's credit that he could obey the voice of Yahweh, calling him out to separate himself from his father's household and separating himself from idolatry as well. Very remarkable. And then later on in the Bible, in the story of Jacob, who, as we know, had a huge problem with his older brother Esau and managed to buy over the inheritance by default, had to run for his life. So he went to Laban, his uncle's house, a nephew of Abraham. Laban was a son of Nabal or Nahor. Nahor was a brother of Abraham. Okay, and we learn that Laban, Rachel's father, because Jacob ended up marrying Leah by default because Laban cheated him of Rachel. But 7 years later, he was allowed to marry Rachel. And later, after staying a good while, Laban's household, Jacob was told to depart from there. And when they came out of the father's household, the father came running after them sometime later. He discovered that his household idols had been stolen, and it was Rachel who stole it. We see this in Genesis chapter 31 and verse 19. And Laban went to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the images that were her father's. Now, just to give you a little bit more of the storyline, when the father came looking for the missing idols, Rachel managed to put them under her skirt and went up onto a camel to ride on a camel. And when the father came to her, she said, well, I have my menstrual period, I can't come down to you. And so he didn't search her, but he sat on his father's idols. And you want to know what happened shortly afterwards? He gave birth and he died in childbirth. Why? I believe he sat on the idols. The idols are demonic, and the demons had something to do with the birth, which became um, bad for her, lethal for her, and cost her her life. So idols are not innocent things. Later we'll see the association of idols with demons and evil spirits. Let's turn to Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 16 and 17. Quote, they provoke him to jealousy with strange gods, with abominations provoke they him to anger. Verse 17. They sacrifice unto devils, not to God, to gods whom they knew not, the new gods that came newly up, whom your fathers feared not. So here we see the association of idolatry with worship of devils or demons or evil spirits, evil fallen angels. And let me refer you to the Septuagint version of the Bible for Psalms 96, verses 4 and 5, which says, for Yahweh is great, greatly to be praised. He is terrible above all gods. For all the gods of the heathen are devils, but Yahweh made the heavens. A very, very explicit statement made by the Septuagint version. For those of you who are not familiar with the Septuagint was a Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, that is the Old Testament, and this was done roughly for about 200 years before Christ. And it was the Greek Septuagint that was the basis of the quotations or the references made by Yeshua in his earthly ministry and the apostles when they wrote the epistles. When they quoted from the Old Testament, they were quoting from the Greek Septuagint because the New Testament was written in Greek. And so they had a correspondence with the Old Testament version of the Bible, the Septuagint version in Greek. I believe it was really the providence and the foresight of Yahweh to preserve the Old Testament correctly via the Septuagint, because the version of the Old Testament that underlies our versions, English versions and so on, like for example the King James, everybody thinks that King James is the best version and so on. Well, in many respects it is, but for the Old Testament there are corruptions, and because the Old Testament of the King James is based upon the Masoretic text, which really was about 4th century Jewish or Hebrew text. By the 4th century, the rabbis had corrupted some parts of the Old Testament in their attempt to expunge any evidence that Yeshua was a promised Messiah. Of course, we know they did some distortions, but they couldn't distort all. But here's an example where the Septuagint gives us the clearest and the most accurate account. And the Septuagint also serves as a bridge for us, because when you compare the Septuagint Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, you are able to see the bridge between the Hebrew words and the Greek words. And that gives us a lot of understanding of Bible verses and doctrines that come forth. Okay, so much for the Septuagint and its contribution to our understanding of the Bible. Now let me turn to what Paul had to say in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, reading from verses 19 to 21. 1 Corinthians 10:19. What say I then? And the idol is anything, or that which is offered in sacrifice to idols is anything? But I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to devils and not to God. And I would not that you would have fellowship with devils. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of devils. You cannot be partakers of Lord's table at the table of devils. So Paul is again explicit about the relationship of or linkage of idolatry with the worship of devils, worship of demons, of evil spirits. Next, a very important verse of Exodus chapter 22 and verse 20. A very important warning to all of us. He that sacrifices unto any god, save unto Yahweh only, he shall be utterly destroyed. A very important verse, that idolaters will be sent to the lake of fire. And this is confirmed by the book of Revelation. And I give you a reference there to idolatry of people in the midst of judgment by Father Yahweh. Their judgment is coming very shortly. Revelation chapter 9, verses 17 to 21. And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire, and jacinth, brimstone, and the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. By these three were the third part of men killed, by the fire, by the smoke, by the brimstone, which issued out of their mouths. For their power is in their mouth, and in their tails. For their tails were like unto serpents, and had heads, and with them they do hurt. Now look at verse 20. And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold, silver, brass, stone, and wood, which neither can see, nor hear, nor walk, nor neither repented they of their murders, nor their sorceries, nor their fornication, nor of their thefts. Wow. This event that I just quoted from Revelation chapter 9 talks about 1/3 of the people of the world being destroyed at one time. One of the judgments. But despite this massive destruction, people who survived still didn't repent of their idolatry, neither did they repent of their sins. Now, let me show you something else that's very important that shows the terrible consequence of worshiping idols. I refer you to the book of Psalms, chapter 115, reading from verses 3 to 8. But our God is in the heavens. He has done whatsoever he hath pleased. Their idols are silver and gold, the work of men's hands. They have mouths, but they speak not. Eyes have they, but they see not. They have ears, but they hear not. Noses have they, but they smell not. They have hands, but they handle not. Feet have they, but they walk not. Neither speak they through their throat. They that make them are like unto them. So is everyone that trusteth in them. Pause there for a moment. Let me give you another verse, and then I'll link up together to give you the thrust of the important point that I'm making here. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, is recorded. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created him. Male and female created he them. So Adam and Eve were made in the image and likeness of God himself. But through sin, through idolatry, people have debased this image of God in them. And not only that, but Psalms 105 that I shared with you just now tells us whoever worships these idols of wood and stone will become like them. Whoever trusts them will become like them. In other words, your image will be of the idols. I have had occasion to minister to people not here but in another country, and this guy had survived a fire and was back from hospital. So I was asked to go and pray for him. And as I walked up the stairs at the first landing, I saw an idol, black in color. I proceeded upstairs. When I first saw this man who had come through the fire ordeal, his face was black or blackened by fire. And the thought came to my mind, he worshipped this black idol. He is now bearing the image of the black idol. Now that's just a physical part of him that got transformed. More important, more crucially, is the soul part of him being transformed into the image and likeness of his idol. So we are warned that we should not debase the image of God in us via the making and or the worshipping of idols. So that concludes my sharing on the roots of idolatry. But just to add a note, uh, Yahshua also told us that we are not to worship mammon, because no one can worship God and mammon. No one can worship two gods. So mammon represents money, the love of money, the things of this world. So that's another form of idolatry. Yeah, a lot of people worship money. They'll do anything for money. And Paul reminded us the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. So here you see again the dichotomy that we showed throughout this message. Either we're worshiping God Himself, Yahweh Himself, or we're worshiping His creation. Angelic beings, pieces of wood and stone, wives and husbands, and human beings are all creations of of Yahweh. So also is money, because money represents the resources of this world that gives us command of the means to buy food, to build houses, and meet our needs of life for living. These things, all these things, the creation of Yahweh, can serve as alternative gods in our lives. And no man can serve two masters. You love the one and hate the other, and vice versa. So, my friends, be committed to the one true living God. Yahweh is his name. He has his only begotten Son by the name of Yeshua, the unique Son of God, who was not created but begotten of the Father, and who in turn was the agent of creation of everything, seen and unseen. To him be all the glory, honor, and power, now and forevermore. Amen. Shalom.